secretary yesterday told me that she got a call last week from someone asking where I was speaking today. And our secretary has been working for us for 16 years, and she told that caller that Jim Stevens does not speak in public. You must have him confused with somebody else, but he does not speak in public. I hope he got here today. I don't know if not, but and typically I do not like to speak in public. But when Bob Warwick asks you to do something, it's kind of hard to say no. But I'm glad to be here today. Bob mentioned my dad was in radio when I was born, and then when I was about 5 years old, he got a good job with IBM, and we started moving around. When we finally settled down, I was in high school in Raleigh, and went to Broughton High School. Some of y'all may have gone there, and graduated the first year. A new high school opened in Raleigh, Sanderson, and then it was off to college. My parents had wanted to send all of the kids to college, give us the opportunity they never had, and even though I wasn't really ready or mature enough to be going off to school, I went to East Carolina after high school. And while there, I think Bob mentioned, I got involved with the campus radio station, and I found something I really loved to do. I did not graduate from college, from ECU, did not get a degree, but I came out of my college experience with a career, and the Lord's blessed me with that. Shortly after college, I got married, and with a baby on the way, started looking for a better paying job, and ended up at a radio station south of Charlotte, a great little radio station there. Learned a lot, and of course we were a young couple just getting started. My daughter Tia was born in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and you know, we had our challenges when you're first getting started. Money's not real abundant, but we were doing good. That was really the best time of our family. Now, my father-in-law lived in Pinehurst. He was a successful businessman there. He had some convenience stores and gas stations and a few other businesses, and he kept trying to get us to come work for him. He made a lot of promises, and we ended up deciding to move to Pinehurst, which turned out to be the worst decision I ever made as far as my family was concerned. Like I said, he was successful, but he had this one problem. He could not trust anyone but family to run the cash registers and handle the money. And I was running a little convenience store and gas station for him, and I had to be there the whole time it was open every day. So I was working 12 and 13 hours a day, 7 days a week, not 5 days, 7 days a week. And it really took a toll on our marriage and our family. A lot of strain on our marriage, and kept hoping things would get better, but it never really did. And one experience I had while I was working at the store, early one evening I was there, the store was empty, it was a slow day, and I was out straightening up the ice cream cooler, and I heard the door open, someone come in the store, and I looked up, and here was this guy with a lady stocking her hose over his head and his face. It was just kind of a scary thing to see. He was holding a sawed-off shotgun, and he was real nervous and jittery, high on drugs, I'm sure. And he wanted me, you know, to go to the cash register. He wanted all the money in the cash register, which was probably not very much. And I had to walk right past him with that sawed-off shotgun. And I was tempted as I was walking past him. I mean, he was just right there. And I was tempted to grab that gun. But even though we were the only two people in that store, I physically felt someone restrain me from grabbing that gun. And I don't know what would have happened if I tried to do that. Certainly, I probably would have gotten shot. I might have gotten killed. And I was not ready to meet the Lord. And I feel God, in His mercy, protected me that day. I felt that physical restraining from grabbing that gun. So anyhow, continued to work for my father-in-law for a couple of years. Tried to find another job. Nothing seemed to work out. And finally I decided to call the manager and owner of the radio station in South Carolina. Wasn't sure he'd take me back, but he was happy to hire me back. And so we packed up, moved back to the Rock Hill area of South Carolina. I was looking forward to seeing our family restored, hopefully. So I'd worked a lot of hours, and it had been a hard time, hard 2 years. But as it turned out, it was more difficult and hard than I realized. And after about a month, my wife told me she was taking our daughter and moving back to Pinehurst. I was devastated, lonely, confused. Nothing I tried to do to get her to stay or to come back worked. And I was just lost. Didn't know what to do. And I'm going to fast forward just a little bit, but you know, this went on for 2 or 3 years. The marriage ended up in divorce. I ended up moving down to the beach to kind of maybe just a change in scenery might improve my outlook. That was a 6-month trip in futility. My problems were right there. I was running from my problems, basically, and they were there waiting for me when I got there. So I got hired back for a 3rd time at that same radio station. The owner just liked me, liked the work I did, and so I was back south of Charlotte at that radio station. I moved in and roomed with a coworker at the radio station, and his girlfriend would come over each evening after work, and we used to get into some crazy discussions and arguments, talk about all kinds of things. But occasionally she would talk about her experiences when she came to know the Lord at this church in Rock Hill. And those were just seeds, I guess, planted in my heart. When I found out she was moving away, I decided to get a religious going away gift. So I went to this Christian bookstore in Rock Hill. And I walked in there, and I was going to get her St. Christopher's medal. And when I asked for that, of course, the clerk said, "We don't carry those." And he also knew exactly where I was spiritually, I'm sure. And I remember feeling real uncomfortable in there. He started asking me questions, spiritual questions, that just made me feel uncomfortable. I didn't have an answer for it. So I decided to get away from him and start looking around the store. Well, he was right there with me the whole time. And finally, I saw a book that had the word miracle in it. And I knew I needed a miracle. And I also knew that book was going to be my key to get out of there. So I bought the book and took off. And it was a Friday night, and home alone. I had no life, honestly. I've heard that term, dead man walking. I had no hope. I had no life, no purpose. Anyhow, home on a Friday night, and I start reading this book. It was a book by a Baptist pastor sharing his experiences with the Holy Spirit. It was interesting. I enjoyed reading it, and he was just telling how God had been working in his life and in his congregation. And later in the book, he shared the gospel, and then he had a little prayer for salvation. And I read it, and I prayed the prayer, and just finished the whole book that night. I didn't feel any different, and I know some people do have a real dramatic experience when they do pray for salvation. But the next morning when I got up, I did feel different. I had this strange desire to go to church, and I never had a desire to go to church back then. And this desire to go to church just seemed to intensify throughout that day, which was a Saturday. So I finally decided I was going to go to church the next day. Not just to any church, but I wanted to go to that church my friend's girlfriend used to talk about. And I had to work on Sunday afternoon, so I couldn't go to the morning service. But I made plans to go to their Sunday evening service. Dressed nicely when I went to work. As soon as I got off of work, hopped in my car, for about a 20-minute ride to the church. Now I was lost and desperate, hurting. And I remember just talking to God on the way to church. I said, God, I don't know if you're real or not, but if you are, I need to know. And Lord, I don't know what real life is all about. I don't even know why I was born. And I need to know what real love is all about. And I got to the church, and I was determined I was going to go to that church that night. Typically, I would just kind of drive by, scope it out, and just keep on going. But I was determined I was going to church that night. I made myself pull into that parking lot, get out of that car, and walk into that church. Walked in, there were people standing around talking, friendly. It was just warm, inviting. And a young guy was there. He saw me walk in. He came up and invited me to join him and all the other young people up at the front where they all sat together. You can tell this was a long time ago. So I walked into the sanctuary with him. And again, people are standing around talking before the service and sitting in their pews. Totally different from my church upbringing. I was taught, you don't talk in church. You're to be quiet and reverent. These people were just enjoying one another's company. And so we went up, sat down. Before long, the preacher came in, and everybody stood up, grabbed a hymnal, and they started singing. I mean, they were really singing joyfully, out loud, also unlike my church upbringing. And I was just standing there soaking in the peace and the presence of that moment. And I remember closing my eyes just to rest in that moment. And the next thing I knew, I felt like I was standing at the foot of the cross, looking up at Jesus on the cross. And as I was looking at him, a drop of his blood fell from the cross. And it seemed to fall down through 2,000 years of time. And it fell through the roof of that church, and it fell and hit me right on the inside of my chest. And I looked, and as it rolled down, I was completely white and pure where it had rolled down. Then I realized how black and dark and sinful I was. And then another drop of his blood hit me, and the same thing happened. It rolled down, leaving me completely white, pure, and clean. And before I knew it, his blood was just washing over me, washing away all the sin, all the black, dark sin of my life. And I was clean. I was clean, forgiven, white as snow. And I don't remember anything else about that service that night. But on the way home, I realized God had answered my prayer. He had let me know he was real. And he had let me know what real life was all about. He had let me know why I was born, that I might have the second birth, be born again, that I might spend all eternity with him. And he also let me know what real love was all about, that he loved me so much. He had taken my place on that cross and died for my sins and shed his blood that I could be forgiven and spend eternity with him. And the Lord was so good to me. Those weeks and months afterwards, he had me at a different Bible study or in fellowship or at church almost every night, helping me grow in him. Those were wonderful times. I remember, we're looking forward to Easter in just a few weeks. I remember my first Easter as a believer. What an incredible high that was to know the Savior who had died for me personally and to rejoice in his resurrection. And so, continue to fellowship at church. A lot of young people also going through this new birth experience and new life with Christ. And I started having this desire to serve the Lord in full-time ministry, full-time radio or Christian broadcasting. And started to ask the Lord to open a door for me. And like a good Christian, I thought I'd help him out some too. And I know none of you know anything about that, but I was out there sending out resumes, making phone calls, sending out tapes, air checks, and nothing was happening. No doors were opening. This went on for a number of months. I kept praying. I even started praying and fasting that God would open a door. And finally, I got to the end of myself, which I know was right where the Lord wanted me and what he had been waiting for. And I just laid it all out on the altar and gave it to him, said, Lord, you know my heart, you know my heart's desire, but I just surrender it to you. I'm going to leave it in your hands. If you want me in Christian radio or Christian broadcasting, you're going to have to do it. I'm not going to do anything else. And we all know sometimes the Lord seems to be long in answering prayers, but literally within a week, I got a call out of the blue from program director of a Christian radio station in Raleigh, my hometown. I'd never talked to him before or sent him a resume. And he had gotten my name from a guy that worked at the Christian Broadcasting Network in Virginia Beach. I had sent a resume up there 6 months earlier, and this guy from Raleigh had talked to just the right person out of the hundreds of people that worked at CBN at that time, who happened to remember getting my resume and remembered that I was from Raleigh. So that's how he got my name. I went up, did an interview with him, and got hired. And my first day to work at this new job was January 1st, 1978. Now that was a special day for this radio station as well. It was WRNC in Raleigh. They'd been Christian for a few years. But I was there at midnight because at midnight, New Year's Eve, they were switching to new call letters to acknowledge their programming. And they switched to WPJL, which means or stands for We Proclaim Jesus Lord. And I ended up working there for almost 15 years before we came down to Wilmington. During that time, I met my wife. We were part of a ministry out of the state fair. We got married. My wife Cynthia had a son, Matt. Some of you may know Matt Wall, who's been working at Carolina Christian Radio for over 20 years now. And Cynthia and I had 2 daughters together, Hannah and Haley. And I guess the genesis of us ending up here in Wilmington was back in the 80s, we would occasionally, my wife and I would come down to the beach here for a weekend getaway, and I was always scanning my radio dial looking for a Christian radio station, and there were no Christian radio stations here back then. I remember praying for God to raise up a Christian radio ministry. And then in the early 90s, I heard about a little AM station that was for sale here in Wilmington. I didn't have any money to buy a radio station, but this was a distressed property. It had been off the air for 3 or 4 years. It had a little tower, old transmitter, and a couple acres of land over by the battleship. And through a variety of different miracles, the door opened up for us to buy it. It was a distressed property. It was real cheap. And we used the equity from our home to buy the station. And went on the air March 16th, 1993. We just celebrated our 26th anniversary. And word spread after we went on the air. People seemed to like the station. We had contemporary Christian music and some of the best national speakers during the middays, many of whom we still carry on the word that Bob listens to. And the only complaint we got was that the signal was not strong enough. Now, Dan Eady came down a few months after we got on the air. He had worked with me at WPJL in Raleigh. And we started praying for God to give us a stronger signal. And it wasn't long after that we heard about this construction permit that was available to build a new 20,000 watt FM station here in Wilmington. We didn't have any money, and the person who owned the construction permit wanted quite a bit of money just for the permit to build the station. And so we were barely making ends meet, and meeting payroll and paying our bills each week. So we didn't have the funds to build it. But we just started praying that God would provide. And one day, a local attorney came to the office with an envelope for us. I opened it up, and it was an anonymous check for $25,000. And we had not broadcast anything about this FM possibility, but God knew. Dan and I started praying that God would raise up some Christian business people and community leaders to walk with us if He wanted us to build a station to help us do that. We had a local businessman come in one day, and he had been listening to the station. He really liked what he was hearing, and he just wanted to know what he could do to help. And we told him about this FM station opportunity, and he prayed about that and came back a couple days later and said he'd like to form a capital campaign committee to raise the money to build this station. Bob Warwick was one of the members of that capital campaign. And these friends who formed this committee raised the money and helped walk us through this whole process of putting 90.5 on the air. We went on the air just before Christmas in 1995. And God's just done incredible miracles since then. And, you know, we had been praying for a better signal from that little AM station. Well, 90.5 had an incredible signal up into Jacksonville, to our south to Myrtle Beach, over into Elizabethtown and Whiteville, and halfway up I-40 to Raleigh. And even when my wife and I and family would go home to Raleigh to visit our parents, I would tune in the station occasionally, and it would be blasting in loud and clear up in Raleigh. So God just did incredible miracles, and continues to do so. If you like to listen to me, I'm on the air each morning with Craig Thomas, who's here. Craig's a longtime Wilmington radio icon. He was on the air at WGNI for many years with a top-rated morning show, and we just have a great time in the morning. We've got today's Christian music, life-changing music, a lot of interaction with the audience, a lot of fun, and just a great staff to operate all the stations. And I know I just have a minute or two more, but I wanted to just mention a couple of prayer requests, ask you all to pray with us about. We have to move the AM tower site that we have over by the battleship. So we're looking for a couple of acres of land, just worthless, cheap land that we can put this tower site on. That's land that's not good for anything else. And if you would just pray for us about that. We do have a time limit on that, so we appreciate your prayers. And we know Lord will work something out. Also, we now have a construction permit to increase the power for our praise and worship station, the Dove 89.7, from 5,000 watts up to 100,000 watts potentially, which would give us a tremendous signal up and down the coast. And the third prayer request is we'd like at some point to be able to have a permanent home for the ministry. We're already starting to run out of space where we're at, which we love our current office and studio space, but we're just praying that God at some point will open up a door for us to have a place of our own with enough room to do what we need to do now and room to expand in the future. And if you'd be praying with us for those special requests. And I'm going to just leave you finally with my life verse, which I saw was up there on the screen. I've prayed this verse for years, and God has just answered it in mighty ways. It's Jeremiah 33:3. The Lord says, "Call to me, and I will answer you and show you great and mighty things which you know not." And He has been true to His word, and He has answered so many prayers and just done things I wasn't even aware of beforehand. And just thank Him for all He has done. And thank you for the opportunity to be here with you, and thank you for your prayers.